In the annals of history, there's a king who often fades behind the towering legacy of his son, Alexander the Great. Yet his own story is no less extraordinary. While the world marvels at Alexander's sweeping conquests, few pause to recognize the brilliance of the man who made them possible. He was no ordinary monarch. He was the architect who took a fractured kingdom and forged it into an empire, the genius whose vision set the stage for his son's rise to greatness. This is the story of Philip II of Macedon, the king who laid the foundation for one of history's most legendary figures. The story starts long before Philip's reign, nearly 3000 BC. The lands around the Caspian Sea were home to wandering Indo-European peoples, always on the move. These tribes moved west in the whole Europe and became the ancestors of the Greeks, Romanians, and other Europeans. Among these, the Greek tribes chose the Aegean Sea as their home, seizing control of the Aegean civilization on the Peloponnese Peninsula and Crete Island. At that time, the Aegeans were considered highly advanced. However, by 1325 BC, the Greeks had taken over the Aegeans' lands, including the Aegean Islands. Around 1000 BC, the Greeks expanded further, establishing colonies along the western coast of Asia Minor. Once nomadic wanderers, the Greeks finally stopped their migrations and began building their famed civilization. Greece's geography is unique, with its rugged mountains and scattered islands, each acting as its own separate region. Famous city-states like Macedon, Epirus, Sparta, Thebes, and Athens were fiercely independent, with their own governments, laws, and even gods. But Greece faced a problem: a lack of fertile land for farming. This scarcity drove the Greeks to explore and colonize new lands. By 750 BC, they encountered the Phoenicians, whose writing system influenced Greek literacy. With this newfound skill, they recorded their history and ideas, advancing in literature, philosophy, and other fields. Their influence spread to Spain, Italy, and North Africa by the 6th century BC, with some even reaching the shores of the Black Sea. The Greeks had the potential to become the greatest naval power of the ancient world, but their constant infighting prevented them from uniting under a single ruler. Each city-state valued its autonomy, and those that didn't build strong militaries were easily overrun. The Greeks prided themselves on their fierce warriors, where every man, rich or poor, politician or peasant, would arm themselves and fight. Their democratic system allowed cities to elect leaders, but it was far from perfect. Corruption ran rampant, with wealthy individuals buying votes and manipulating the people. This flawed democracy led to the rise of tyrants in many cities. Then came the 6th century BC and the rise of Cyrus the Great of Persia, who overthrew Media and established the Achaemenid Empire. His empire expanded rapidly, conquering Lydia and then turning westward toward Greece. With Greek cities disunited, they fell easily to the Persians. The Persians' dominance over Greece brought an era of subjugation, not cooperation. When Cyrus died, Darius the Great led an army of 70,000 across the Bosphorus into Europe, but while he conquered Thrace, he failed to subdue Macedonia. This small kingdom in the north of Greece stood firm against the Persian invasion, although the rest of Greece was not as fortunate. Macedonia, though not originally Greek, but admired Greek culture. They spoke Greek, adopted Greek art, and tried to mimic their southern neighbors. But the Greeks, in turn, viewed them as barbarians of the north. Philip's family, the Argeads, was among the most distinguished in Macedonia, tracing their lineage back to Alexander I, a figure loyal to both the Greeks and Persians. When Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BC, Alexander I was fighting with the Persians in their conquest but was also aiding the Greeks, earning their respect and allowing Macedonians to participate in the sacred Olympic Games. The royal family's embrace of Greek culture continued, bringing philosophers and thinkers to influence Macedonia. power shifted between kings until Amyntas III ascended the throne, leaving behind three sons, Alexander II, Perdiccas III, and Philip II. After the assassination of Alexander II, the reign of Macedonia was thrown into turmoil until Perdiccas III restored order. And he sent Philip to Thebes, where he spent 5 years learning from the military leaders of the time, particularly the famed Epaminondas, conqueror of the Sparta. When Perdiccas fell in battle in 359 BC, Philip took the throne. He was a charismatic and clever leader. His primary goal was the unification of Greece to resist Persian control, a seemingly impossible task. Yet, Philip also sought to solve Macedonia's internal struggles. Poverty and debt plagued the farmers, and the lack of a coastline made trade difficult. In 358 BC, Philip II of Macedon embarked on a path of political marriages. His first alliance was with Adada, the daughter of the defeated Illyrian king Bardalus. This union wasn't driven by love, but by strategy, as Adada's presence in Pella acted as a shield, quelling the threat of a hostile resurgence from the northwest. Not long after securing this frontier, Philip turned his gaze to Thessaly. His next marriage to Philina of Larissa dipped him into the murky waters of Thessalian diplomacy, the first of two such alliances from the region. But the most famous of Philip's wives came next, Olympias of Epirus, a powerful woman who would soon be mother to Alexander the Great. By marrying Olympias, Philip fortified his border with Epirus, further expanding his influence. And Philip wasn't finished. With Nicephilus and 4 more women, from Macedonian noblewomen to fierce Scythian princesses, he crafted a web of alliances across the region, ensuring his kingdom's security. Whatever emotions he harbored for his 7 wives, Philip's view on marriage was clear and calculated. This approach wasn't unique to him, but was a long-standing tactic in the political game of Mediterranean rulers. However, Philip, ever the master strategist, pushed the practice further than any before him, turning every marriage into a weapon for the Macedonian crown. Philip wasn't content with merely following the old diplomatic playbook, he rewrote it. After securing Thessaly, he pushed Macedon's military machine to its full potential. This wasn't just a brute force approach. Philip knew when to strike and when to simply let the threat of his power do the talking. Over the next decade, his revolutionary army crushed resistance, expanded Macedon's influence, and kept his enemies in check with precision. One such moment came in 346 BC, when the Illyrian tribes of Dardanes and Ardii tried to rise against him. Their unity didn't stand a chance. As soon as Philip caught wind of unrest brewing on his northwestern frontier, he wasted no time. He marched his forces straight into their lands, delivering a crushing blow that shattered their resistance. But Philip's victory didn't end on the battlefield. In the aftermath, he scattered the tribespeople, deporting them far from their homelands, forcing them to intermingle with other populations, a cruel tactic designed to weaken their bonds and ensure they'd never rise against him again. It was strategy at its most ruthless, and it worked. In 342 BC, with his sights set on an all-out war against Athens, Philip moved swiftly to ensure no one could strike at him from behind. His first move was in Epirus, where he deposed Olympias' crafty uncle Erebus, who couldn't be trusted to keep the peace. In his place, Philip installed Alexandros, a man groomed in Pella, molded by the Macedonian court for just this purpose. This wasn't just a coup, it was a calculated chess move in Philip's grand game of power. As he prepared for the final showdown with Athens, Philip orchestrated a delicate balance between the major Greek states, like a master puppeteer pulling strings from the shadows. His alliance with Thebes kept Athens in check, forcing the city to maintain its armies in Attica, far from Macedonian borders. Meanwhile, the looming threat of Sparta prevented Thebes from shifting its forces south. In one stroke, Philip had neutralized the military ambitions of both Athens and Sparta, leaving him free to strengthen his hold over Greece without a single sword being raised in his direction. The stage was set, and Philip's masterful diplomacy had left his enemies tangled in their own webs. The message was unmistakable. Philip's quiet manipulations across Greece had cornered every rival, tightening his grip on power while he grew ever stronger. By the summer of 341 BC, he launched a bold Macedonian invasion into Thrace, sweeping through the region with decisive force. Soon, Philip was in command of Thrace's wealth, from its bustling Greek cities along the Aegean coast to the mineral-rich lands stretching to the Balkan Mountains. His spoils were vast: cities, resources, and a ready supply of manpower for his ever-growing empire. But while Philip consolidated his new territory, Athens was busy stirring the pot. They threw their weight behind Philip's enemies in Euboea, sending settlers and backing a naval expedition under Diopithes, who resorted to piracy against Macedonian ships. It was a dangerous move, testing Philip's patience and threatening to provoke a clash that could engulf the entire region. Yet, as always, Philip played the long game. Instead of rushing to retaliate, Philip played a different hand. Rather than unleashing his army, he sent a formal protest to the Athenian assembly, demanding they recall and punish Diopithes for his provocations. But Athens, stirred by the fiery orator Demosthenes and his faction of hardliners, outright refused. To outsiders, it may have looked like Philip was backing down, unwilling to respond to what was essentially an act of war. Yet this apparent restraint wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Philip had his eyes on a much larger player, the Achaemenid Empire. For much of his reign, the vast Persian Empire had been in turmoil, but by the late 340s BC, Artaxerxes III had regained control over his sprawling dominion. In 342 BC, before Philip set his sights on the Hellespont, he struck a delicate agreement with the Persian king. Persia would stay out of Philip's affairs in Thrace and at sea, while Philip promised to keep his ambitions away from Asia. It was a carefully measured balance, and Philip wasn't about to jeopardize it. He remained cautious, ever mindful of the resources Persia could bring to bear if provoked. Athens eventually made its own move, sending an envoy to Susa in the early summer of 340, seeking a defensive alliance with Persia. For Philip, it was a dangerous game of diplomacy, one where every action and reaction had to be weighed with the utmost care. When Athens' envoy returned empty-handed, albeit with polite refusals and a few financial gifts, it was as if the final thread holding Philip back had snapped. Macedonia's restraint was gone. 2 years later, in 338 BC, Philip struck with the precision of a master tactician. At the Battle of Chaeronea, he crushed a formidable alliance of Athens and his old hosts, Thebes. The result? A unified Greece, brought together under the banner of the Hellenic League. In just 2 decades, Philip had steered Macedonia from the brink of ruin to towering dominance over Greece. His brilliant fusion of diplomacy and military prowess had reshaped the ancient world, turning his once weak kingdom into the undisputed power of the region. The victory at Chaeronea was not just another triumph, it was the culmination of a plan years in the making, a legacy that would echo through history. In a tragic twist of fate, it was a small act of diplomacy that paved the way for Philip's demise. The day after his daughter's wedding in July 336 BC, a grand celebration unfolded in Agai. 12 statues of the gods were paraded into the theater, and behind them, a striking image of Philip II himself. The king followed, cloaked in brilliant white, his bodyguards keeping their distance by his own command. Philip wanted the world to see him not as a paranoid tyrant hiding behind armed men, but as a beloved leader of Greece's Hellenic League, secure in his reign and adored by his people. But as Philip strode confidently into the heart of the theater, a dark shadow loomed. From the ranks of his trusted bodyguards, a lone assassin broke formation, stepped forward, and thrust a blade into the king's chest. In that instant, The man who had reshaped the Greek world was gone, and history itself shifted course. Watching from the crowd was a young prince with fire in his eyes, Alexander, soon to be known as Alexander the Great. The torch had been passed, but at a price no one could have foreseen.